Hi, I'm Safi.
And I'm Mystic.
And welcome to Lore Together, the husband and wife duo who do a podcast about lore for video games, which includes the characters, the worlds, the setting itself, because it's the thing we like to do together. We lore together.
Yes, and this is episode 15.
Woohoo!
And we're gonna be grazing the surface of the Half-Life and Portal universe.
Oh, this sounds like dangerous territory. This sounds like this is something where somebody will try to correct us on something, so...
Well, if you do want to correct us, you can contact... you like that segue? If you do want to correct us, you can contact us at loretogether@gmail.com or on Twitter @loretogether. Mm-hmm. You can find me once in a while on Reddit under the username loretogetherpod. And if you really like this podcast or you really want to have early access to the episodes or access to our streams or mini episodes early...
We have one!
We have a mini episode out there. You can do that at patreon.com/loretogether.
So, with that being said, we are now going to move into the world that Valve created. And there's not an official universe name for this world, is there?
No.
Question mark?
I don't know if there is or not, actually. I didn't even think about looking that up.
I'm sorry. I have a beverage so I can stay awake because being pregnant means you need caffeine to do anything after 4 hours. It's just ridiculous.
All right, I'm not going to bother editing that out just so that we can explain that because that's going to be working in all the time then.
Yeah, apologies if I'm just sipping iced tea because I've just been extra lethargic. At the end of the pregnancy, this baby's growing super huge. We're going to give birth to a future giant, which makes sense because his father's a giant. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Here's the big problem with this whole franchise, both franchises, is...
Oh, you said there's a problem. Fanboys and fangirls everywhere are going to hunt us down.
Oh, no, they're probably used to this problem, too.
Okay.
Valve's official stance is that they do not intend on providing a definitive Half-Life or Portal series timeline, as they fear the possibility of contradicting themselves would limit their creativity in future games.
Okay, so I have so many problems with this. First of all, just philosophically, I think a lot of good creativity happens when there are restrictions. And it's not to say that canon can't change. We are fans of Star Trek Discovery, which has changed some ideas of what is canon. But at the same time, it was still working within the confines of the Star Trek universe. It's a balancing act. You're not always going to get it done perfectly right. But there needs to be restrictions for good creativity, in my opinion. So part one, I think they're one. Part two, it sounds like it's just an excuse to basically do what J.J. Abrams has done with the Cloverfield universe. Do you know this problem, Mystic, or do you not?
I know.
Okay. So there was the first movie, Cloverfield, which I like that movie as much as it can make you nauseous. And literally when I saw it in this little theater in Massachusetts, with my boyfriend at the time. And literally they said, we've had people throw up. So there's these exits to the bathrooms. P.S. If you can't make it, there is literally a bucket in the back aisle there. And then we're talking about small town theater, so they could do things like this and people weren't offended. But after Cloverfield came out, what would happen is that the other Cloverfield movies, including the one that was released most recently on Netflix, were all based on scripts that were not originally supposed to be in the Cloverfield universe. And it becomes this kind of hodgepodge of a franchise where they kind of, and the second movie is like Cloverfield Lane, where the premise is this woman, she gets in a car accident and she's trapped in this bunker because she's being told that the world outside is messed up, but is it really messed up? Or is
that the one with John Goodman?
Yeah, with John Goodman, which Goodman, I always love John Goodman. But then they had the one on Netflix, which everybody was like, this is just a hodgepodge, weird sci-fi mess. And it turns out it was based on a different script entirely. And I've heard what the original script was supposed to be, and the tension was more kind of science political crossover stuff with discovering something new rather than this thing that kind of explains, oh, this is why everything's messed up, and this is why now, and like they're trying to explain near the end why the Cloverfield monster even exists. And it's just, what I'm trying to say is, it is so much less fulfilling if you just kind of make a cook-up of a franchise rather than you actually have a set recipe for what makes the franchise the franchise. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I have no problem with going back and changing stuff to smooth over jarring bumps in the canon road,
I
so to
know
speak.
that's what you do with your work, and I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of long-standing franchises have to do that.
You have to at some point. When you start getting into the fine details, you have to either go back and change it completely or explain away the inconsistency.
Exactly.
I don't think that they are avoiding the history that they've set out, but I do think that it's actually, I think, more like Roddenberry, where Roddenberry said the most recent version of the Klingons, because he was talking about the original series to the motion picture, the most recent version is how they have always looked.
Right.
And I think that's the way Valve approaches it too. The most recent version of the timeline, whatever event is being described, that is the most recent version of that. Because there's a character we're going to talk about. I'm only going to cover one of the ways that he dies.
But he can be considered to die more than one way.
But before they established that in one of the games, in a secondary or tertiary source on him, he died in a totally different way and at a different time, but it was not in the game.
Was it like in a
It was like in a post or a alternate reality game or something. It was not in the actual game itself, as far as I could tell.
Okay. I don't know. I can understand going back and refining and editing things. The reason the Klingons look better is because makeup was better and they decided they didn't want to go based on a Persian stereotype, which, yikes, guys. I don't know. We'll see. I might be prejudging a little bit too much.
All this is just to say that this episode is messy and the story is still in the progress of being written. We've seen this before, actually. We're going to be doing Hellblade eventually again.
Yes.
We're going to be doing...
Oh, my gosh.
There's the ever-present hope that Scars of Arcadia will get a sequel. There's...
Ever-present.
Myst is rumored to have a TV series.
We need to bring Mist Island back. This should be the campaign that we die on, is that Mist Island has to happen and Disney can go off because they're just not doing it. They didn't do it right.
But I'm saying here, like, the stuff that we cover on Lore Together always has a chance of changing because a new team will take over or a new version will come out or whatever, and they will fix stuff that doesn't make sense, or the new... Like, if Scars of Arcadia is remade today, they may go back and readjust some of the story tropes or some of the storyline to fit with today's sensibilities.
Yeah, especially character expressions is the first thing I think of with that.
So...
I think that's what you're saying is that, video game franchises are living documents, and maybe with the Half-Life universe, they're more they just let it breathe and grow a lot more than, say, Elder Scrolls.
Elder Scrolls does a lot of retconning too, but it's a lot more like in the esoterica. It's not like in the actual game.
Right, that's a little different.
It's like in the book in the game. Well, that doesn't make sense. Like in a book you're reading in-game.
Yeah.
So, but again, you can explain that away in a game like Elder Scrolls because it is an in-universe source. Is there a bias to this source in-universe?
Yeah, a lot of fantasy series does it too. When I did my research for Dragon Age, that's kind of, there's suggestions of stuff like that as well.
Well, I know in Dragon Age you have, the big discrepancy is between the Chantry in Orlais versus the Chantry in Tevinter.
Don't get me started. If you want to talk about something where there's contested histories, the history of Andraste, which is essentially Joan of Arc and Jesus were combined, that's another episode for another time. But we've done Dragon Age 2 recently, so I'm not going to do it now. I'll do it the next time Mystic needs a break.
The point remains that in-universe sources can be wrong.
Yes.
Intentionally so.
Absolutely.
And even in the series we've touched on the most, in Myst.
Yeah.
Myst has massively retconned those books that you find Cirrus and Achenar in. They are completely changed what they are throughout the series.
Well, and not only that is a whole series that's built on the idea of a untrustworthy narrator.
Yeah.
When you think about the Book of Atris that we went over, which episodes were that? Do you remember?
Book of Atris was 10 and 11?
Yes. So if you listen to episodes 10 and 11, the Book of Atris, one of the biggest themes is the unreliable narrator. Because it turns out not only was Atris raised by his grandmother, who was in some ways an unreliable narrator because she wasn't revealing the whole story, but then when his father's introduced, that's a seriously huge unreliable narrator.
And of course, even Atris is a slightly unreliable narrator because he doesn't have all the information to work with from his point of view.
Yes, exactly.
So, there is no all-knowing. There is the all-knowing narrator and the unreliable narrator.
Yeah, and the Book of Atris kind of seems to lean into that idea. So you can work with that. I don't know. We've gone on very long about this idea of, retconning and keeping things canon. And I think the thing is for us is that there's a fine line with playing with the nuance of a stable, reliable setting that you can go back to. I will say this. When I think of something that does it horribly, I think of what they've done with the Cloverfield franchise. When I think of somebody who leans into that nuance really well, I think Myst does a very good job. Yeah. I think, Elder Scrolls does a very good job because they are built within systems where it makes sense that not everybody has the whole story, so you can't just say that, every character speaks the truth all the time.
Well, this episode, as a result of all of this, is going to be kind of messy. But if you think this episode is going to be messy,
yeah,
wait until we get to these shifting perspectives of the games in the future. Because, again, this is still being written. Valve seems completely incapable of counting to the number 3 on anything.
Oh,
but they can do side stories because they just released Half-Life Alyx.
Yes.
Which changes some stuff from the other Half-Life games.
Right.
And the first Half-Life has a mess of expansions that are from different perspectives. It is the same event from different perspectives. And those are called Opposing Force, which is from the view of the bad guys. Mm-hmm. There's Blue Shift, which is a view of the Guard.
Okay.
And then there is Decay, which I didn't even know existed. It is a PlayStation 2 exclusive.
Wow.
And that is from the point of view of other scientists who were in the Half-Life story.
Right.
And there's always a chance that facts can be altered at a later date. So just getting into this episode, I want the listeners to know that this is a mess, and I would like to apologize in advance if I gloss over or forget to cover something or have some detail wrong, because it's just the nature of this franchise.
Okay.
So Half-Life is the first product for Kirkland, Washington, now Bellevue, Washington-based developer Valve Software.
Kirkland and Bellevue, are they close to each other? Do you know?
That I don't know.
Okay.
We will get to what they are close to soon. Valve Software was founded in 1986 by former Microsoft employees Mike Harrington and Gabe Newell.
And everybody knows Gabe Newell because Gabe Newell's kind of like the face of Steam for a long time, right?
He's a big chunky guy with a beard and glasses.
But he's one of the... So it's so funny because there's so many game developers who try to look like cool dudes, but not trying too hard cool dudes. And Gabe Newell just leans into the nerd and just doesn't care. And I've got a lot of respect for just living your truth when you're that successful in your industry.
Half-Life came out in 1988 and it was the first really successful story-driven first-person shooter. Others before it may have had decent, quote, decent plots,
right,
or interesting characters. One notable example that comes to mind is Shodan from System Shock, which is an amazing villain.
Right.
And I want to cover it here, even though we're not going to cover it ever, is GoldenEye for the 64 came out a year before this, but GoldenEye 8 isn't a great game.
Oh, you're going to piss off a lot of people our age with that. Oh my gosh.
It is the first really good FPS on consoles. It has aged terribly.
Right.
The multiplayer is still fun if you're in that age group.
Okay.
But, graphics aside, Half-Life feels like it still could be in the modern era with how it tells story.
It does tell a story in a very visual, cinematic almost way.
GoldenEye being a story FPS where it's telling a story, it is a licensed product. It is aping off of a movie. Mm-hmm. So when you're playing it, you have that movie as a backing. You know what the scene is from the movie. So when you play it, your brain starts filling in the gaps.
Right.
So we're not going to cover I shouldn't say we won't cover licensed products. We will not cover licensed products that are just, here's the movie repackaged, or here's the book repackaged.
There's no point of that. There's plenty of really good movie and book and other podcasts that cover stuff like that. We're here for the lore of originally video game settings.
If they do a very weird take, here's a weird one. Men in Black.
Yeah.
Comic book first. Mm-hmm. Movie. There is a game that is kind of like a point and click adventure, but also action-y type thing. It is not related at all to the movie, but it features movie characters and stuff.
Right.
And, we could cover that because at least that is a unique game experience.
Right. I would also say another one that I would say is Chronicles of Riddick, because
Yes.
there's a part of my heart that will always forever appreciate Vin Diesel. And he tried to make a video game company and did this, and it was a very separate story from what...
What's it? It starts with a T, I think.
Oh, I'd have to look it up.
I'd have to look it up. I'm not going to bother that now. So that is Half-Life as...
We got a lot of tangents not related to Half-Life this time.
So that's Half-Life, the first big story-based FPS.
Yeah.
So let's diverge a little bit into Portal for a second. We're going to do a mini lore on a game called Narbacular Drop.
Excuse me, what did you call me? What? What is that?
So, the original idea for this portal-based gameplay of dropping portals around and being able to move from point A to point B is from a group called Nuclear Monkey Software, which was a team created... Well, you're giving this look, but here...
I'm sorry, Nuclear Monkey Software.
Let me give you context for that name.
How old were they when they made this company?
It's not a company. This is a team creating their senior project at DigiPen, Institute of Technology. So they are in school still.
Okay, that's exactly what that sounds like to me. That's all.
So, as a matter of fact, DigiPen, and another slight tangent here, was at the same time in the same building as Nintendo Software Technology in Redmond, Washington. DigiPen is one of the bigger game development schools out there.
Right.
They are probably one of the highest pedigree ones out there. There's a couple other ones, Full Sail and stuff, but DigiPen is kind of like one of the older ones and one of the biggest ones.
Okay.
Another side note, actually. As I was researching this, I looked up where all these places were now.
Yeah.
They're all still in Washington. And so it's like between Spokane with Cyan, Redmond has Nintendo and Microsoft, Bellevue has Valve. Bellevue is only like 6 or 7 miles away from Redmond.
Oh, wow.
And so Washington has all these great game developers and stuff. And literally, if you look on Google Maps, Nintendo's America headquarters is just surrounded by Microsoft stuff. Microsoft's headquarters is across the street from Nintendo's.
That's so funny. Because we think of Silicon Valley as this place where all the tech heads go, but we forget that Washington's kind of this nerd central too. For example, you've got Wizards of the Coast is based there. I actually, for a while, I remember when I was in high school, I thought I'd move out to work for Wizards of the Coast. Mm-hmm. At that time, I didn't know there were other gaming companies I could work for and how hard it is to get a full-time job at an industry like that. So that's not my plan anymore.
Right.
But it's just Washington. It's so crazy because it's got such a weird nerd presence that's been there for decades, and you forget about it.
Anyway, Narbacular Drop. As I said, this is a student project.
Yes.
It stars Princess No Knees. She is called Princess No Knees because she can't jump.
Okay.
And she is captured by a demon, imprisons the princess, and she discovers in this prison that the dungeon she is actually held in is a sentient elemental creature named Wally. Wally has the ability to make portals, and she sets out to escape and defeat the demon. However, this is a student project. They never actually put a proper end in. No Knees never confronts a demon, but the tech is great. The tech is there. You can create portals. You can create portals through portals, which you can't do in Portal, actually.
Right. Right, you cannot.
But so... Valve was actually presented this idea. DigiPen holds an exhibition or a fair or whatever.
That makes sense, yeah.
And Valve saw this, and they brought this team on. Originally, they were brought on. They worked on Half-Life 2 Episode 1, but then they went on to make Portal. Mm-hmm. Also, another slight side note, Valve has a habit from pulling from DigiPen. In 2008, another team called Tag Team was a group working on a game called Tag, The Power of Paint, which saw the use of paint to allow the players to do random things in the game world, like bounce off of one color, stick to another, let them move faster, that type of stuff. Valve hired that team, and after working on Left 4 Dead 2, they developed Portal 2, which uses a lot of the same technology with painting surfaces with different gels.
More respect for the name Tag Team. I'll just say that out loud.
So we're not here to talk about the games or the events that happen in the games. We're talking about the events that predate all these games. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to be touching a lot on Black Mesa. We'll get to Black Mesa in a second, but we're not going to be delving too deep into them because a lot of their stuff is kind of shadowy background stuff.
Yeah.
Instead, we'll be covering all this in-universe history from the beginning up until 1998 when the metaphorical hits the fan. So the story of this universe revolves around two companies, really, and their experiments, Aperture Science and Black Mesa.
Aperture Science.
Both are applied science research companies. They are competitors and, generally speaking, seriously lacking in oversight.
A lot of these stories that happen in not just video games, but in sci-fi in general, is usually when research is run amok. And especially with the kind of people telling stories now, because there are whole generations of writers now who remember from Jurassic Park. But yeah, I feel like in a lot of pop media, that's been something that we keep coming back to because, first of all, Jurassic Park is just the pinnacle of awesome storytelling for a lot of us here. And it's always been a compelling idea overall, is that should science be restrained? And if so, why?
Right.
And a lot of times these stories are basically answering the question as to why you would restrain certain research.
Right.
#ethics.
There's not a lot of that here. When we're talking the timeline for the games, I do want to mention one more thing that makes this really complicated.
Because it wasn't complicated enough.
The events in Half-Life 1 take place in 2000 blank. So it's somewhere between 2000 and 2009. We don't know.
Okay.
And the problem is all dates from there are given as 50 years before the events of Half-Life 1, which could be in a 10-year range. So it's kind of, I'm not going to go into anybody's births because, nah.
Right.
It's giving you a range then. They're 50 years before the events of Half-Life 1, blah was born. Well, okay, that's 50 years between, this year and this year. So it's not worth getting into. It's just going to be a bunch of names and dates that are just going to be confusing.
Okay.
So we're going to avoid a lot of the details like that where it's just either it doesn't matter or it's a small little detail that is kind of like a silly detail in a ARG or something, an alternate reality game.
Okay.
So the detailed history of Black Mesa itself is kind of hard to come by. We have detailed experiments for Aperture, which we'll get into.
Okay.
Black Mesa is a lot harder to nail down. When things go wrong there, and they do catastrophically go wrong, it seems to be the exception as opposed to the rule, though. Though they're also flipping out lives of workers, they seem to have a modicum of restraint in some ways compared to Aperture.
Right.
Aperture, for contrast, seems to revel in kind of the impulsive seat-of-the-pants science, which is largely attributed to its CEO, Cave Johnson. He is a person who doesn't understand science, a big idea guy who just charges forth crazy ideas and a lot of no-nonsense 1950s machismo.
Oh, this sounds like this would also fit perfectly in the Fallout universe.
A lot of parallels there, yeah.
Okay.
Black Mesa, on the other hand, is, quote, just a government research company.
Ugh.
Yeah, they have a lot less going on in this episode, but keep in mind as we delve into Aperture Science's specific experiments, Black Mesa's run their own with the U.S. government into things like teleportation, portal technology, but in a very different way than Aperture is. And we'll touch back on them at the end of this all.
P.S. I just want people to know that, some people may think it's fantastical to think that the U.S. government would research things like teleportation, but there literally was a department of the government around the Cold War that was trying to research the ability for psychic powers.
Psychic powers, we researched how to do UFO technology. We did all sorts of weird stuff during the Cold War, including at one point we put a microphone and a transmitter inside of a cat and tried to send it to a Russian embassy. And imagine, first off, a 60s microphone implanted in a cat.
The only way I could see that happening is if the cord looks like just a little bit of tinsel 8 sticking out of its rear end.
They put the antenna in its tail. And the cat got run over before it got to the embassy. They literally just kind of set it out on the street.
Well, of course, that poor cat's in too much pain to even look both ways across the street. It's just...
So the government has always done weird stuff, and if you want to get into really weird experiments, outside of, the controversial ones like Tuskegee and stuff, you can start getting into, there's...
MK Ultra is the
MK Ultra is
super famous
So
right
the government
now.
has always involved in some sort of this stuff, so it's perfectly understandable that a scientific applied science company would be involved in weird experiments with the government.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a whole movie that kind of influenced by that called the Men Who Stare at Goats with George Clooney, which I don't even think the movie went that well. I just remember I love that title. But I just want to legitimize the idea that this is not just a fantastical... Guys, the government's been doing this for a long time. They've just basically... There's always going to be somebody who's got a crazy idea who wants to have an advantage.
I mean, we're not alone in that either.
No, we're not. But I'm...
A lot of countries and a lot of countries do really weird science ops and stuff. We'll get there.
I just want to mention that because sometimes art is, life is inspired by art, which is inspired by life. That
Right.
back and forth. It's one of those situations.
So, also, one last thing before we get into the history proper, there are things we don't have any hard dates or even knowledge of. There's alien races that we don't meet until these portal stuff goes wrong, and it's not like there's a history book for us to delve into what's going on in their worlds before you first see them.
Okay.
So, that said, we'll fill that in when we visit the universe in a future episode and delve into the games proper. We'll try to cover that detail there.
Right.
The first thing we know of in the timeline is actually the early life of Cave Johnson. We don't know when he was born exactly, but it was likely before 1920, as in 1943 he'd already founded a shower curtain company called Aperture Fixtures.
Aperture Fixtures. Now, is aperture a real word? Am I just...
Yeah.
Okay.
An aperture is a portal. Usually when people talk about apertures, they're talking about an aperture in a camera maybe, or something like that. So the name was actually chosen to make the curtain sound more hygienic. It's like sciencey word.
Yeah, but it's a portal to cleanliness. I can see it right now.
They literally marketed that a low-tech portal. After he racked up his first billion...
Those must have been some really good shower curtains.
Yeah.
Did they come alive and wash your shoulders while you were in there? That's
Probably
a
not.
really good shower.
So he racked up his first billion and purchased a salt mine in 1944 in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. In 1947, Aperture received the award for the Best New Science Company from the Science and Business Institute of America. Now, here's the fun thing. We're going to get into a little bit of discrepancy here. On the wiki,
Yeah?
in 1949, Aperture Science is rated number 2 amongst the top 100 applied science companies by a Mechanical Engineering World Journal. It is implied that the number 1 spot was achieved by Black Mesa, but nothing firmly concludes this. Based on the intense rivalry between the two companies, that's kind of just what's implied. There is no firm grounding I can find that when Black Mesa itself started, just at the facility that Black Mesa was eventually built over,
Yeah.
was started in the 1950s as an ICBM launch facility in New Mexico.
As a what?
Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Facility.
Okay.
So, there's this facility that's built in the 50s. The company may have existed before then. It's again, this is where it gets kind of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey with the timeline.
Right. And again, and I'm going to possibly retract a little bit of my criticism because it makes sense that the government would want to subterfuge the history of something that was helping them with essentially Cold War defense and
I could see that a lot of
this
this stuff could be classified. There is actually a lot of stuff in the Half-Life universe that is classified even when you're there.
Right.
It's like this, how come I didn't know about this? It's classified type stuff.
Right.
So that's a fair explanation. That did not occur to me. But, the 1950s is when we kind of really start cooking with some actual juicy stuff here.
Ooh,
1952, we have Aperture Science get second place for the Department of Defense Contract of the Year award.
It's suggested that Black Mesa is the first
It is suggested
again?
that Black
Okay.
Mesa is the one again. They also invent repulsion gel in this year and begin testing it.
Is that so? That's basically you can jump on it and you're repulsed.
Well, let me explain what their actual thought process was, and this will explain the, quote, science that Cave Johnson likes to push. Repulsion gel is invented as a dietary pudding substitute. The gel, a bright blue color, is said to be a sweeter, slightly less non-toxic form. I copied this straight from the wiki. Slightly less non-toxic, so it's more toxic form of fiberglass insulation.
What?
I didn't realize that until I was reading out loud. Its purpose was to cause subsequently ingested food items to bounce off the lining of the dieter's stomach and out of their mouth. So you wouldn't be able to eat if you had this.
So you'd basically have a ping pong version of bulimia. Sorry, I should. Unfortunately, that's what it sounds like. That you're essentially going to vomit out your food because it's bouncing. That sounds so violent and awful.
Oh, we'll get to violent and awful later.
Ooh.
Lastly, in 1952, we know they began construction of Test Shaft 9. with an entrance, lobby, and an elevator. One of 9 shafts dug into the salt mine for thousands of meters. We're talking like 4,000 or 5,000 meters down, where Aperture did their testing in testing chambers, which were large geodesic spheres that were primarily made of asbestos.
Gross.
Quote, all these science spheres are made of asbestos, by the way. Keep out the rats. Let us know if you feel any shortness of breath, a persistent dry cough, or your heart stopping, because that's not part of the test. That's asbestos. That's my best Cave Johnson impersonation.
That's so bad. It's just so awful.
We don't know what was in 7 of the other shafts. We've only been to shaft 9 in any of the games, and another shaft that we don't know the number of. So
Shaft number 9 sounds like a club in the industrial section of a city, you know, where it basically, literally, it's underground techno music.
In 1953, Aperture Science goes public.
Okay.
This is all done on like government work and like as a private firm and everything. They're still making shower curtains, but there's obviously other research happening behind the scenes. By now, they have finished work on some of the testing chambers in Shaft 9, so let's discuss some of those tests.
So all the tests we know about are in shaft number 9.
Yes.
Okay. So there's at least 8 other shafts.
Yeah.
That we don't know about, except for the one shaft who is a bad mother.
So at this time, Aperture is actually really pulling from, you know, the quote cream of the crop in terms of test subjects. They're pulling astronauts and soldiers and sports heroes and that type of stuff.
So really athletic. I'm assuming at this point, because we're talking about 1950s, really athletic white men.
Probably.
Okay.
Not 100% sure. There is a non-canon character named Mel.
Okay.
And Mel is a woman who is kind of like early days Aperture Science.
Okay.
Who's a test subject, so probably not always men.
It's me making an inference, just knowing about the kind of culture that we're basically almost.
I get it.
It's a parody of that culture. Let's be honest.
But so they're taking these people, astronaut, soldiers, and sports heroes, and they're doing some crazy stuff to them.
Uh-oh.
And here's some of the tests that they're putting these people through: injection of praying mantis DNA into test subjects, turning them into mantis men.
What?
This test was later postponed indefinitely to be replaced by another test: fighting an army of mantis men.
So they were successful in making the mantis men, and then they had to get soldiers to fight the mantis men.
Firing an invisible laser at test subjects, resulting in their blood being turned into pure gasoline.
This is so bizarre and not... Wait, that's alchemy. That's not real science.
The
What is
transformation of test subjects' excrement into coal.
this? I'm okay with that one.
Pointing a superconductor at full power at test subjects with no particular goal in mind, Cave Johnson remarks that in this case, they're simply throwing science at the wall and seeing what sticks.
That's not how you... No, somebody's got to come with some sort of hypothesis. Oh my gosh. Okay, never mind.
And notes that the best case scenario is the test subject gaining superpowers, whereas the worst case scenario is the subject growing a number of tumors, which Johnson promises they will have removed.
If they can, I mean, if it's in the middle of your brainstem, that's not going to be useful.
The 1950s also saw the creation of what was then called the Aperture Science Portable Quantum Tunneling Device. This is the predecessor to the portal gun we all know and love, and was used in many tests in Shaft 9 as construction continued. 1956, the Eisenhower administration signs a contract with Aperture Science to manufacture shower curtains to all branches of the U.S. military, except the Navy.
Black Mesa? I don't know.
Don't know. In 61, they closed Test Shaft 9, though work likely continues in the other shafts. Why they probably closed it? Here's why. In 1968, they are involved in the Senate hearings about the disappearance of astronauts.
Oh, yeah, that would piss off a ton of people.
And at this point, they are nearly broke.
Yeah, because they're getting sued because they lost astronauts.
Around 1971, Aperture reopens the upper levels of Shaft 9 and starts testing and using propulsion gel. This orange and supposedly sweet and largely non-toxic liquid of fiberglass insulation was originally to serve as another diet aid, serving as a dietic pudding substitute and marketed under the name propulsion pudding. What? Its purpose was to increase the velocity of any food following it through the digestive tract, leaving the body no time to absorb calories. However, it was pulled from shelves when it was discovered that digestion plays several crucial roles in the eating process, such as breaking down food into manageable chunks before being violently expelled from the human body.
Right. I mean, guys, this... Obviously, a nutritionist was not involved in any of this. This is just so awful. First you've got Upchuck, and now you've got the worst, stiffest case of the runs. I can't.
So because they've opened Shaft 9 again, they've actually started doing more experiments in the 70s again, and we have a few of those. An experiment having a test subject's blood replaced by peanut water for a few minutes, which cannot be performed if the test subject is allergic to peanuts. Johnson states a new type of Nobel Prize will have to be invented for them if the experiment succeeds. Teleportation experiment which may have the test subject's skin removed after the teleportation process. Before the test subjects are asked to remember what type of skin they have in case it has to be removed during teleportation, and Cave promises test subjects will be sewn right back into it.
Whoa.
And finally, this is one that will be coming back to eventually, a unknown experiment with a ship called the Borealis. Literally, the ship has no way of exiting the dock it's in. It's not there when we get there, and it shows up in the Arctic eventually. So it's obviously some sort of weird experiment or something, but we know, we'll get to that eventually.
This reminds me of a actual conspiratorial event that I know thanks to one of my favorite podcasts, Last Podcast on the Left. I got into him for the serial killers and I stayed for the alien conspiracy theories. And there is literally a story of like they tested out this alien tech on a ship, and the story is that, you know, it disappeared and it came back, and people it totally messed people up. People are stuck inside the ship because they rematerialized like a foot or two away from where they were, and just
I remember that from that TNG episode where they had like a cloak that they materialized inside of a solid rock wall and stuff.
Yeah, this sounds very similar to that story.
From what I'm understanding, the Borealis was kind of portaled to where it was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. We'll get there eventually. That's way in the future of Half-Life. Again, this is one of the main reasons that these timelines actually do intersect, aside from the company rivalry, is you have these experiments kind of play off of each other. In fact, Cave Johnson continually says that somebody is stealing Aperture tech and remaking it. So he thinks that Black Mesa is stealing their tech, and
Interesting.
So it's just a lot of.
And he's just publicly calling out a fellow U.S. contractor like that.
Here's the weird thing. So after in the 70s, as you're walking through some of these rooms, you will see, like, notify your supervisor if you see anybody from a long list of federal and local government agencies. Basically, like, they don't want any oversight here at all, or they are doing stuff that's really wrong.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's like they're a government contractor, but they're kind of not at the same time in some ways. It's really weird. In 1976, Cave Johnson gets a confidential memo detailing different groups of test subject possibilities. Quote, hobos and tramps.
Okay, that is definitely a Fallout plot.
Orphans.
Oh, that's also a Fallout plot.
Psychiatric patients. And seniors.
That's Nazi plot. Okay. 2 are Fallout plots, 2 are Nazi plots. Just
as a result of this memo, in 1978, when we see a shift in Aperture, when they stop using elite astronauts, war heroes, and Olympians, who are costly to pay if they survive, and missed if they don't survive, as the Senate hearing showed. So they start using homeless people for test subjects.
Oof.
Offering them a mere $60.
Right, but they're desperate. And
with an additional $60 if they let Aperture take them apart. Literally, quote, take you apart, put some science in, and put you back together good as new.
This is so gross, guys. I just, ethically, I just have so many issues with this.
Yeah, it is clear Cave Johnson has no care for those below his self-inflated social status.
Right.
His tone and messages to the homeless subjects are condescending. Literally, that's an elevator, not a bathroom. You know, stuff like that. Please don't touch the glass. Stuff like that. Almost like being homeless means they're defective or a failure. You know, it all feeds into this strongman persona, a guy who projects all his insecurities as utter confidence.
Right. And it's let's be honest, like a lot of this is just highlighting the failings of capitalist meritocracy.
Capitalism is fine, but the fact that you're rich doesn't mean that you are better or whatever.
I think the thing about capitalism that makes it so unethical so easily is that people think that I've earned it, and they forget that there's this whole thing of luck. Like you're super lucky if you're born in a country that, you know, has a certain level GDP, that has a certain level of resources. You know, I didn't choose to be born in the United States, but I'm lucky enough to. And also born in the United States to a family that had certain privileges because they were already established
Right.
within the capitalist meritocracy.
Now, there is the thing to be said for the misquoted pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, which of course is literally the term pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps is an impossibility.
Yeah,
like
that was
you
what
cannot
originally
actually
meant.
do it.
Yeah.
But it's come to mean like working yourself up to be a success. There is something to be said for working your way up from a humble beginning to be a success.
There are people
There
who
is
do
nothing
that.
wrong
Yeah.
with that.
There are people who do that.
And there is nothing wrong inherently with, quote, capitalism. There is a problem when it comes to people like Cave Johnson, where they see that the fact that they are rich as means that they are better than others.
Right. And I will say that there are some people who would argue that that is inherently part of capitalism, and they say that's why there's something wrong with capitalism. Depends on how left you are on the spectrum.
Right.
I personally think that, regardless of whatever political organizational structure you prefer, you need to have oversight, you need to have ethics, you need to have people be accountable, or else there's going to be corruption. And that's my take on it.
Capitalism is fine until it gets corrupted, is what you're saying. That's basically
Every system is fine until it gets corrupted, because what you have to do is essentially the people who pursue power for power's sake need to be curbed. End of story.
right. And Cave Johnson here is
That
seriously
person.
trying to skirt around ethics or regulations or whatever.
Because it sounds like he's not like he's a scientist, or a lot of times the story of a passionate scientist is they're obsessed with this one kind of science. They're obsessed with this one thing, and they keep pursuing it.
His concept of science is not science. His
Right.
concept of science is wanton experimentation without hypothesis or without care.
Yeah, and
So-
there's not even a respect for the study or the education of it
Right.
as well. So it's definitely
And to explain, he's not even a good businessman. Like, this is a guy who
doesn't-
had...
It sounds like it. If you
Right.
think it's okay to like force vomit food as a diet plan, like
Well,
nobody needed
no,
a
like,
thing
even
for that.
financially-
It's an awful thing.
Financially, he's not a good businessman. He has
Yeah.
$1 billion. He buys a salt mine and starts doing massive experiments in construction projects. That's going to grow through $1 billion really quick.
Even
in
that's
the
a fair
50s.
point. That's a fair point.
And to further cement this, in 1981, Cave Johnson spent $70 million on moon rocks. His company doesn't have $70 million at that point. They barely have
wow.
$7 million. They barely have $7.
Wow.
Like, they're bankrupt. So again, he is impulsive and just a terrible businessman.
Okay.
So we'll continue. They discover that the lunar material that they bought is perfect for portal usage, actually. And like, you can use a portal device on it, no problem. Accepts it every time. In the process of grinding up the moon rocks, he develops silicosis.
Silicosis.
It is a real condition. You can actually get this from handling lunar samples, but it's more commonly you get it from stone cutting and grinding or living in a sandy climate. Basically, silicates get into your lungs and start causing problems.
Right. So, which, whenever somebody who's talking about, colonization or trips to other planets for long-term research, celestial dust
Right.
is one of the problems you have to solve.
Also consider that lunar regolith. There's a word that most people don't
What
know.
the
Lunar regolith. Well, lunar regolith is really what moon dust is. It's called lunar regolith. It is.
Okay.
Yeah. It's blasted with radiation from the sun, and it's obviously it's no surprise he's going to develop something from that. Like, it is ionized at best.
Right.
And the end, but still, the end result of this whole grinding process is called conversion gel. It is not a dietary supplement this time. It can just be a thing that is sprayed onto a surface to allow it to accept a portal.
Okay.
However, Cave Johnson is gravely ill from his exposure. He is dying. He is in pain, on painkillers. His lungs and kidneys are shutting down.
Okay.
His concept of time is completely off kilter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he plans out a 3-tier research and development program to ensure Aperture's success in the, quote, fast approaching distant past. Again, his concept of time is off kilter.
Oh, okay.
In it, he details the Heimlich countermaneuver.
So you're trying to get somebody to choke on something?
You're basically countering the Heimlich maneuver.
So somebody's performing a Heimlich and you're countering. That is the worst kind of assassination attempt I've ever
The
heard.
Take-A-Wish Foundation.
So he's just being contrarian as all
Yeah,
heck
this is
right
kind of
now.
just jokey stuff at this point. Take-A-Wish Foundation was literally like, we're going to take the wishes from sick kids and give them to rich people. It was just really stupid. And
Oh my god.
yeah. And renewed development for the quantum tunneling device. Furthermore, in response to Aperture's continued struggle for test subjects, Johnson made testing mandatory for all employees.
Wow. So they no longer had easy access to poverty-stricken people.
Yeah. So, desperate to cheat death, in 1982, Johnson ordered his engineers to begin research and development on a computer system that could store his consciousness. That's a common trope.
We're getting close to the point where that could be quote-unquote a thing.
However, should the system not be completed before his death, Johnson ordered, you're going to hate this, Johnson ordered that his ever-loyal assistant, Carolyn, succeed him as the CEO of Aperture and have her consciousness uploaded instead, regardless of any protests she might have.
I think I remember hearing this part, and that's just, oh man. So, okay. It just, again, he's just doing things. I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. Again, Cave Johnson is appropriating other people's bodies for his own curiosities, even after death at this point.
Yeah. At some point after this in the 80s, he dies. We don't have an exact date. Mm-hmm. In the wake of his death, though, conversion gel is getting fully tested and utilized in the testing chambers. This gel would eventually be used in the paneling in Aperture Science's testing chambers built above the old testing shafts. This is kind of what you see in Portal 1.
Oh,
you
wow,
see these white panels and stuff. That's what this is made of. The life extending system is what we would come to know as GLaDOS, Genetic Life Form and Disk Operating System.
And this explains so much already off the top of my head.
Here we're going to bring in a new character, Doug Ratman. He works for Aperture. He is involved in the creation of the modern version of the Portal Gun, as well as the Aperture image format, which is kind of like an interactive image format used within Aperture.
Yeah.
We're not going to get too deep into him now. He kind of plays more into a thing later in the timeline. We'll cover him more in the events of the 2000s. At some point late in GLaDOS's construction, Doug went to see his colleague Henry, don't have a last name, while he was working on the AI in her chamber, because they have a giant chamber for the GLaDOS AI.
Okay.
Henry praised their technological advances, stating that artificial consciousness is the next frontier. Doug was not convinced by the process, since GLaDOS attempted to kill everyone each time she was turned on during the testing phases.
Oh my gosh.
Each time she was turned on, forcing them to switch her off immediately.
Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. So.
I don't know if she's in there yet, but I know what you're talking about.
Ooh. Okay.
Later, Doug came across Henry while he was designing a device called the Morality Core. Henry asked him to turn it on, and then Doug asked what it was, to which Henry answered it was the latest in AI inhibition technology. It would act as GLaDOS's conscience. Ratman believed it was insufficient to stop her murderous intentions, arguing that you can always ignore your conscience.
You really can, unfortunately. You really can.
We'll leave Ratman for the future. We're almost at the end here of the 90s, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's a lot of small little details. There's other minor experiments that are played into the, Valve will release a game that's, we're doing VR experiments in Portal. Here's a couple of VR small little games, and that'll be in the thing. It's not really story related. It's more just like we're working it into the universe, even though it's not part of the story.
Oh, okay.
So there's stuff like that happening.
Okay.
But we'll leave Ratman for the future and briefly touch on the rest of Aperture's other innovations in the 90s. This is where we get the rest of the things we see in the Portal games. And they're all, these are the giant pneumatic tubes that move you between levels and drop off cubes and stuff that you work with. Mm-hmm. The aerial faith plate, which is basically like a slingshot mechanism.
Okay.
The excursion vent, which levitates objects or pushes and pulls them through the air in various directions, and it is partly made of liquefied asbestos, because we couldn't leave that alone.
Oh, come on, with guys with the asbestos, really?
Some things had earlier versions, like the giant button we see and the weighted cube had prototypes in the earlier days, but the look that they have now is designed by Aperture in the 90s.
Okay.
And not the last thing, sometime before we end the 90s, and it's not clear when, but not earlier than the mid-1980s, I would say. I have no definitive thing on that, but it kind of feels like the decent area in the timeline. Scientists at the Black Mesa Research Facility, this is now owned by Black Mesa and the government jointly, discover an alien world called Xen.
Okay.
I think it's Xen. It's Xen. I think that's Xen.
Let's go with that for now.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to correct us later, we're willing to accept that. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know the pronunciation of.
Bad pronunciation. But it's an alien border world called Xen. While they're developing their own teleportation technology. Basically, things are teleporting. They're like, where are they going? That type of thing. And science expeditions performed by survey teams, quote unquote, are secretly launched to study and collect data from Zen using a huge teleport deep within the top secret Sector F of the Black Mesa facility. Mm-hmm. Despite the deaths of dozens of researchers,
Whoa.
Zen inhabitants and wildlife are brought back to Earth for study in Sector E. Soon, members of the Zen security teams recover several Zen crystals from the border world, which are to be studied in Sector C's anti-mass spectrometer. Sectors in Black Mesa are kind of like the shafts and stuff in whatever.
Okay.
It's kind of like, this is where we do our testing.
Okay.
We're going to end with a brief mention of Gordon Freeman, the silent protagonist of the Half-Life series. He graduates from MIT in 1989 with a degree in theoretical physics and a keen interest in the practical applications of teleportation.
Okay.
And that's kind of where we're ending. That's literally the last thing that happens before the 2000s start. And the 2000s is when everything goes crazy.
Crazy. Oh my gosh.
So,
I didn't realize he was that old.
I think he's 27 during the events.
Wait, if he's 27, but he graduated from MIT in 89?
99.
99.
Yeah.
Okay, so 99. Okay. That is less.
Yeah, Gordon Freeman is born between 1972 and 1982 because, again, Half-Life is set in a decade. So
Right, exactly. Okay.
So yeah, that's where we're at. That's the prehistory of the metaphorical hitting the fan in the universe for
Wow.
multiple times. Like 2000, like the 2000s is a lot of different things happen. Half-Life 1 and Portal 1 both take place during it, and
Wow.
yeah, there's just a lot of stuff. So we'll probably cover Half-Life and Portal 1 in another episode sometime, and then that's not accurate. We're going to cover multiple episodes of Half-Life and Portal going forward, because there's stuff that we're going to have to dive into very small, minor details on.
Right, exactly.
So again, that's the prehistory of this franchise right now, and
Whoa.
yeah.
It feels a lot more chaotic than I thought it was going to.
Yeah.
You know, and even outside of the idea of the canon basically being flexible, it's just the idea that a lot of it, first of all, you don't know much about Black Mesa. So but we only had like 5 to 10 minutes where we were even talking about that throughout this episode.
Yeah.
And then with Aperture, it's being run by a madman, a lunatic, somebody with, delusions of grandeur, It's insane.
Yeah, we're going to end there.
Well, that was shorter than usual, but there was a lot going on in there as well.
It's a lot of rapid fire, but also there's just we're not delving into a deep story. We're just delving into, for all intents and purposes, one man's life at this point.
Right.
So, and he's not as deep as King Merrick was. So.
Well, yeah, King Merrick kind of also slept around a lot, so that's the only reason why we're still talking about him. It doesn't sound like Cave Johnson had a lineage that affects the story quite in the same way.
That's fair.
Yeah. There was a reason why I chose King Merrick.
But literally,
and part of it is because he was promiscuous and changed history because of that. So,
like, Cave Johnson's claim to fame in the fandom is that he's funny to listen to, and he has a weird charm to him still. Like, he is definitely a charismatic individual.
A charismatic
narcissist.
That's. Oof.
And
oof.
He has this great speech when he's telling you that he's coughing and stuff with this silicosis. He has this great speech about when life gives you lemons, you make life take the lemons back and say, I don't want your damn lemons. And
oh my God. Yeah. So I can understand that there's a little bit of popularity with the absurdity of him.
The absurdity is kind of what makes it fun.
Right. But he sounds also kind of like the same issue with, I have to watch the newest season, but the same issue with Rick Sanchez and Rick and Morty.
Yeah.
He's a compelling character to watch, and he's funny and amusing, but he's not a hero.
No.
You cannot look up to Cave Johnson.
The difference, I think, between Cave Johnson and Rick
from Rick and Morty, yeah.
I don't know if Rick sees himself as the hero.
I do not think Rick Sanchez sees himself
Cave Johnson
as
sees
a
himself
hero.
as the hero.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my impression of him. His view on what science is and what it should be is progress at any cost. So
and there's been too many times that any military
and progress there seems to be like, let's be honest here. The portal tech is being designed. Let's be honest. There's no practical application for consumer for Portal Tech in this franchise. Like,
Right,
it is
right.
being designed for military purposes, most likely.
Which makes perfect sense to me, yeah.
Other than shower curtains, it's like, I don't know if he actually did anything that was consumer oriented. And to kind of cover something that you had a question about when we said he died, this is the guy who died a different way in the original canon.
Okay.
Originally, he died due to mercury poisoning, trying to make poisoned shower curtains, specifically to give to members on either an armed forces committee or a Senate committee who had voted for him not to have the Navy contract as well. So he is a
Wow.
vindictive narcissist.
Right. Yeah. Power corrupts. And
Yeah.
well, no, you know what? Actually, no, not power corrupts. I think the better phrase is actually power reveals. And with all that power, he revealed that he just wanted to be able to. He considered the whole world his test subject.
Yeah. And again, didn't know the science to begin it, to even do any real science.
Hey, that it sounds like he has a lot in common with Gen.
He does, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, that's fair.
Big ego, forcing his will on other people,
Yeah.
convinced that
All
he
right.
knows how things work, even though he hasn't
Both are
done the hard
balding,
work.
yeah.
Both are balding, I guess. Yeah, there you've got that too. I mean, wow.
Cave Johnson intentionally looks a little bit like Walt Disney in the 1950s portrait of him. He's kind of got that smile and like the slicked hair and stuff.
Yeah, I could see that.
It gets weird. But yeah, we're going to end it there. So that's episode 15. We will eventually get back to Half-Life. We're not going to be able to not get back to it.
I mean, it's so funny because we talk about all these games we're going to get back to, and it's just so funny because we're only 15 episodes in, and I feel like there's so many other series we just haven't even touched any of their lore.
Well, I think that we'll sprinkle in revisits between things. Like, this is the first
Right.
time we're doing Half-Life, so we're not going to touch it for 5-10 episodes, maybe longer.
At least, yeah.
But, we should get back to Elder Scrolls, at least for a mini episode or something. We can cover...
Yeah, I think mini episodes
Yeah.
would make sense with that. And speaking of which, if you would like to listen to our mini episodes, we've got the one that's already available, and you've got 2 more weeks before it'd be for the public. So if you want to catch it before all your friends do, sign up at patreon.com/loretogether.
Yeah.
If you just want to keep up with us in general, we have our Twitter, which is @loretogether. You've also can sometimes find Mystic on Reddit with the username loretogetherpod. You can email us directly, loretogether@gmail.com. And I think that's it for now.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you follow us, you join us, join our Patreon, leave a review, because you know how these silly algorithms work on all of these podcast sites. We want to make sure that everybody who's into like general lore of all of the games that we love would be able to get some of these little nuggets of information.
But thank you, guys.
Thank
and
you.
We'll catch you in a couple weeks.
Well, yes, barring there isn't a child that interrupts everything.
Okay. If there is a child, I'll make a brief announcement episode you guys will get. So,
Right.
but then we'll be back.
But then we're not stopping. There'll just be a child in a little child swing in between the microphones or something. All right.
Thank you
Thanks.
guys for listening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.